Hi everyone, I am Kimberly, the 5-Minute NP. The 5-Minute NP was born out of my belief that small, incremental changes can drastically change the trajectory of your life. Our genes do not have to determine our lifespan. My goal through this podcast is to act as a roadmap that bridges the gap between knowledge and action, leading to you living your healthiest, happiest, longest life. Welcome to the 5-Minute NP podcast. Hello everyone, welcome to the 5-Minute NP podcast. In this episode, I welcome back Natalie Ladesma. She is a well-seasoned practitioner with over 20 years experience as a registered dietitian nutritionist. She is a board-certified specialist in oncology nutrition and a clinical nutrition specialist at the Smith Integrative Oncology in San Francisco. She is the founding dietitian for the nutrition program at the University of California, San Francisco Helen Diller Family Comprehensive Cancer Center. Today, Natalie covers all things hormones, what they are, what they do, symptoms of imbalances, and how we can correct them through nutrition, supplements, and more. Natalie shares so much information that is clear-cut, easy to understand, and easy to implement. Let's face it, our quality of life isn't great without a hormones imbalance. Thank you so much for being here. Enjoy this episode and welcome to the 5-Minute NP podcast. Hi, Natalie. Thanks for joining me again.
Welcome. I'm happy to be here. Thanks, Kimberly.
Yeah, I can't wait to have this conversation. I'm super excited about it. So let's just start with, tell me more about your background. I know you've been on in the past, but for those of people that don't know you, what do you do and what's your background?
So I'm a board certified oncology registered dietitian nutritionist with also a lot of focus on gastrointestinal health and just kind of integrative functional medicine techniques, and essentially utilizing an integrative and functional nutrition approach. I develop practical and client-centered diet and lifestyle plans that are designed to promote vitality and wellness. And I do, as I mentioned, work a lot with adults during and beyond their cancer treatment, but I'm also working with supporting individuals who are navigating chronic health concerns such as fatigue and digestive issues and brain fog and weight challenges and blood sugar issues and all. And my focus is, of course, to help improve energy, enhance mental clarity, reduce systemic inflammation, balance blood sugar, optimize digestive health, and simply have someone feel well and feel healthy.
That's awesome. Inflammation, I've been talking a lot about inflammation because seriously, that's like the underlying cause of chronic disease.
Yes.
Huge. Insulin resistance and digestive problems. It's crazy. Well, I'm excited to know more about all of that in regards to hormone balance. So let's jump in and talk about hormones.
Yeah, I think one of the areas that I started finding as I was piecemealing all these different challenges up and realizing, we just need to have a full discussion on hormones, and not meaning just estrogen, but all different kinds of hormones and how these have an effect on our energy and our, on our cognition and our weight and our blood sugar and our mood and our libido and so many factors. Mm-hmm. So, just to back up a little bit, hormones, if you're not familiar exactly kind of really what they are, I know you are, Kimberly, but for others, right. They're our body's chemical messengers, and they travel in our blood, to our tissues, or our organs. And generally speaking, they work slowly over time, and they have an effect on many different processes in terms of metabolism and sexual function, reproduction, and our mood and our growth, and in so much, there.
Yeah, they're huge. When they're out of balance, well, what are some symptoms of hormone imbalance? Well, I think you kind of just went over it, really.
Definitely, a lot of those things would, exemplify, kind of like be representative of hormone imbalance. I'd say that you could also add in for women who are cycling irregular periods. You could add in anxiety or depression, which sometimes can tend to come up, particularly during perimenopause. Obviously, later on in menopause, we may see temperature dysregulation and hot flashes. Food cravings could be something, or even those also who are cycling having severe PMS. Skin related issues. I always think of gut with skin, but definitely also could be related to hormone imbalance, whether that be, really, really dry, wrinkly skin, or perhaps really oily, acne-prone skin. So it really could span quite the gamut of a variety of different, aspects that we may encounter when we're thinking, is this hormone imbalance or not? So it's not like, oh, it must be because I'm tired.
Right.
Fatigue is a variety of things that could possibly be leading us to fatigue, but it certainly would be one indication that hormones could be a little awry.
Mm-hmm. Is it a good place to start at like looking at the gland itself, like the thyroid? I mean, you talk about hormone imbalance, obviously something's causing it. So is it the gland itself, like the thyroid or the ovaries or what?
I would say yes and no, honestly. I mean, I think absolutely it makes sense to, see a practitioner who can do a physical exam and, really palpate the thyroid, not just look at the blood work, and certainly to do a gynecological exam to make sure that everything does feel okay and does look okay. I think those are oftentimes more if they're, quite significant health issues, where we may find something where, the thyroid looks, perfectly normal or feels perfectly normal, but when tested, we may see markers that are not 100%, optimal. And so I think it could be a little bit, of definitely looking at things, but we know that, hormone imbalances could also be caused not just by the physical situation of the gland or the organ, but chronic or extreme stress, which we could probably all raise our hand to in the last year in particular, definitely could lead to hormone imbalances or, diet, issues or, and even as we mentioned earlier, inflammation, whether a poor diet leading inflammation or other factors that lead to inflammation that then could lead to hormone imbalance or blood sugar challenges. If there's disruption with glycemic regulation, that too could lead to a hormonal imbalance. We see that quite frequently with polycystic ovarian syndrome, but I see that a lot, in women who are, perimenopausal and menopausal as well. It's not necessarily just one that we're seeing at a younger age. So body weight, if we're really heavy, if we're obese, that also increases inflammation and that could lead to hormonal disruption. So I'd say, and I work with cancer, so chemotherapy, radiation therapy, could also be issues. So I would say definitely both the physical, nature of the gland or organ, but also some of these external circumstances could also be a factor.
You're so right. When you think about hormones, a lot of times, you're thinking about estrogen or testosterone or some of those, but there's so much more into play, like cortisol and insulin and our hunger hormones. You're right. There's so much more about it than just, estrogen and the ones we hear enough about. So so basically, as far as the causes or conditions, you kind of went through all of those different things. So what does all these hormonal shifts put us at risk for? Like what ultimately is the outcome of having these and not corrected?
Well, naturally, we're going to have hormonal shifts as we, move through our life cycle. It's, part of we just would hopefully have it to be more streamlined where we're not having negative repercussions, from, such drastic hormonal shifts. And thinking in particular, hormone shifts, whether that be pubertal or perimenopausal, if we have hormone shifts, particularly if they're combined with changes in body composition or other kinds of health behaviors, then we are at risk for, unhealthy weight gain or, overweight or being obese. Cardiovascular diseases definitely increase, and other kinds of metabolic related morbidities, and not meaning necessarily just diabetes, but even having just dysglycemia, where we're kind of on the way towards that, but not necessarily as extreme as diabetes, just as to name a few anyway.
Yeah. Is it possible to manage our hormones naturally?
Yes and no. I mean, I think there are times where we, of course, need to have, intervention to supersede or to help us. But certainly we can play a role and empower ourselves with being able to balance our hormones, naturally. I mean, a few things just to keep in mind from a nutritional perspective, definitely making sure that we kind of swap out carbohydrates, particularly refined carbohydrates, and incorporate healthy fats, because healthy fats definitely are kind of the foundation of really allowing hormones to build and develop kind of naturally. So things like avocado and coconut and wild caught fish and extra virgin olive oil and chia seeds and flax seeds and things like that could be excellent to help. We want to make sure that just from our overall nutrients that we're getting sources in terms of vitamin D, or do we have enough of our B vitamins from leafy greens and or a little bit of whole grains, or magnesium is going to be crucial in there. And can we get that with, some of our leafy greens or avocado or even a little bit of dark chocolate? It's really dark. There's not as much, sugar in there. And that is potentially a source of magnesium. Bone broths can be great, also for gut healing and more, factors, as well. And then I would say, and there's a lot more we could kind of even go in just in terms of, diet, but even beyond diet, I think sleep is crucial. And if we don't get enough sleep, that certainly is going to increase our potential of having our hormones be off. I think we also want to make sure that we're not taking medications or birth control that may be further exacerbating the issue, or if we are, what can we do to help mitigate that? Or is there a way that we can work to better balance things? And I think even, emotional imbalances, play a role here too. And we know anxiety increases insulin resistance, for example. And if there's also, traumas that have been buried, we do see sometimes that those two can, have an effect even many years later. So I do think that there are ways that we can empower ourselves and help to better balance our hormones in a natural way.
Also, when you're talking about healthy fats, like for us that are getting older, as far as skin health and preventing wrinkles, it's important to get healthy fats and cholesterol, right? I mean, isn't that kind of the hormones come from cholesterol, and it's important for our cell membranes and our skin to prevent wrinkles?
Yeah, I mean, the fats serve as our building blocks, as building blocks for our hormones. And so if we have zero fat, oftentimes our hormones are, going to be lower. And, whether that's the sex hormones, the thyroid hormones, the adrenal hormones, or your cholesterol, all of those definitely could be affected. And in fact, sometimes if I see somebody who has a very, very low lipid profile of total cholesterol and LDL and so forth, and it's really, really low, and they're not taking medication, I definitely will probably immediately think, okay, hormones are likely also very low, because they are going to somewhat go hand in hand. At the same time, of course, we don't want to have excessively high levels, of those either, but making sure we at least have adequate, and I think probably even more so than quantity in terms of diet anyway, is really just making sure we have quality. Because we could say, oh yeah, we had plenty of fat, and we were eating processed vegetable oils and lots of refined products and other oils and things like that we wouldn't want to be having much, that could certainly set us further astray with our hormones. But if we have high quality healthy fats, I think that there definitely is a role for those in our daily diet.
So I hear that a lot, eating healthy fats, but other than like avocado and salmon and nuts and seeds, what other things are positive to add, like breakfast, or, sometimes we don't really know what to eat. You just hear healthy fats, like, where do I go with that?
So in addition to those, I would say, extra virgin olive oil, I would count in there. Not that you're going to have that for breakfast, but definitely, of course, within meals. I think in terms of breakfast, I think there's a lot of room we can use chia seeds, in different ways, whether we're using like an overnight oat, overnight chia pudding type of scenario, or putting chia seeds within a smoothie, or some people just put chia seeds in water. I feel like you can make them taste so much, better, that I tend to do other things with that. But whatever works for you, is great. And then I would say also, even, in addition to chia seeds, if we're needing a little added fiber, protein, healthy fat bonuses, ground flaxseed can be very useful, and also hemp hearts, which are just kind of that inner part of the hemp seed. And hemp seeds are great too. They're just really, really, really crunchy. So some people tend to not, eat them quite as much. But now it's, readily, I find, readily available to get organic hemp hearts, and those are pretty neutral in terms of flavor. And I think chia seeds more neutral in terms of flavor even than flax. But being able to add, a tablespoon or two of these, to a smoothie, if you are making some sort of overnight, kind of chia pudding or something like that, or overnight oat, that can work. Or if you're even using it in a soup, you could definitely add them there. If you are incorporating, an organic Greek yogurt or some sort of non-dairy yogurt, you could definitely, add those to that. And again, you can add it to water, you can add it to an apple. It's just that it's going to not be quite as, it's not going to sit there and kind of, be quite as easily to how you consume, that way.
Mm-hmm. What about vitamin A, and what do you feel about eggs? Because I know vitamin A, or the egg yolks, egg yolks are a good source of vitamin A, which is good for our skin. How do you feel about eggs? Which way do you go on those?
So egg-wise, generally speaking, I think eggs have a lot to offer. There are, some, we're in relationship to oncology. I'm less worried about eggs and it increasing cholesterol per se. We don't want to have, and there are some people who are having, 2-3 eggs every single day. That probably would have an adverse effect. But if you're having generally 7 to 10 a week, I think that can oftentimes be incorporated without adversely affecting lipid parameters. With cancer, there's some hesitation of, we know eggs and all types of animal protein can increase insulin-like growth factors. So I'm a little bit more cautious in some scenarios. There's not a lot of direct evidence of eggs and, specific types of cancers per se. There's some thought that perhaps choline, and choline is found in eggs as well, particularly in egg yolks. But choline is very beneficial for our liver. It's also very beneficial for brain health, but there has been some evidence that higher amounts of choline could have a negative effect in relationship to prostate cancer. So sometimes with prostate cancer patients, I'm a little more cautious in terms of egg use, but not thinking of, cancer specifically, I think that we could, use eggs. And if one really wanted to use eggs every single day, then it may make sense to use some that are just egg whites and then having some that are egg whites, egg yolks. But generally speaking, I have organic pasture-raised eggs in the refrigerator, and I don't typically, only buy whites or only buy, yolks. I just tend to have them, together when we do serve them.
Mm-hmm. Okay. What about superfoods to balance our hormones? I've heard a lot about maca. How do you feel about maca root powder?
I like maca, but I feel like we need more research on maca. It's not something that I think is a, sure shot, plenty of evidence, no question that it's going to be beneficial. I use maca, honestly, mostly to help boost libido. And so I'll use that if I'm looking at markers and we see DHEA, DHEA sulfate or DHAS, and or testosterone levels, and a lower libido. If those are all kind of on that lower side, then I do think maca could possibly be beneficial. Similarly, we want to be mindful that because maca, could have a hormonal effect, then those that have hormone sensitive cancers, I just want to be cautious with. I do sometimes think that they can be useful, but I wouldn't want to just say blanket everyone could use as much maca as they want, because then we could have some possible negative repercussions. But most of the research uses about 1.5 to 3.5 grams of maca on a daily basis. And the trials sometimes are 6 weeks, 12 weeks, 8 weeks. I was kind of looking at, looked at different ones. But that's kind of about that amount. And that's pretty easy to have, because if you have a half a teaspoon of maca powder. And again, you could put that in your smoothie, or you could put that in, other foods or so that you're having. That's going to give you about 2.5 grams, right there. The capsules are going to be, you probably have to take multiple capsules, but if you're doing the powder, so if you had high estrogen, I would be a little nervous of using maca, just to make sure we didn't pump up DHA and testosterone, and we don't want to aromatize that further into estrogen. But if everything's, on the low side, I think maca could possibly have a role.
That makes sense. I read actually with thyroid problems, you should avoid maca. Like, it's not good with thyroid problems, I read.
Well, interesting. I haven't seen data saying that. I mean, definitely thyroid hormones tend to interact with a lot of, factors. So sometimes I'll even make sure that if somebody's using a thyroid medication, that we, space out, calcium and iron and magnesium and maybe also, maca or things like that, 2 or more hours separate of the thyroid medication. But I'll have to look more closely at that. Was it even just in terms of timing of administration, or just across the board?
It just said if you have a thyroid condition, a known thyroid, you should avoid maca. That's what I read. I was like, okay, I don't have one, but I just think that's good information to look into, because a lot of people have thyroid problems.
Definitely, a lot of thyroid disruption. I'd be curious to see what the exact mechanism would be that would have that relationship, because typically it's been more in terms of sex hormones that I've seen it, as opposed to thyroid hormones or adrenal hormones. And oftentimes, if adrenal hormones are low, maca could be indicated to be helpful. And oftentimes, if adrenal hormones are low, wouldn't be shocking that thyroid would be a little bit low, and vice versa. If thyroid is low, likely the adrenals may be, a little on the low side. So yeah, I haven't seen any studies of that nature, to that effect, but certainly open to reading further.
Yeah, check into that, because a doctor actually told me about it, because I was putting maca in my smoothies, and he's the one that actually told it to me. So then I went and looked it up. I'm like, oh yeah. Well, I mean, I don't have a thyroid problem that I know of, but I just thought that was an important point to mention with that. Other than that, it sounds like it's got a lot of great qualities, the maca, which is why I wanted to bring it up, because if it's helpful, that's a good thing. And also biotin. Did you know about biotin and thyroid? I don't think you're supposed to combine those either.
So biotin and thyroid are okay. It's just that if you were going to get your blood level tested, then you want to hold biotin, away from it. And I wonder if that's more of what's happening even with the maca too. Similarly, if somebody were taking iodine, it doesn't necessarily mean that iodine is going to be bad for the thyroid. In fact, obviously, they probably are taking it to help the thyroid.
Right.
But yeah, iodine could, particularly if it's in milligram dosages as opposed to microgram dosages, could affect thyroid biomarkers. And so it'd be wise to discontinue, things like that, definitely probably 48 hours or maybe even 72 hours prior to having those levels assessed, to make sure that you don't get any false representation of a level being high or low that just is simply modified by an outside agent like biotin, or perhaps maca can do that too.
Okay, that's good to know. What are your thoughts on intermittent fasting as far as hormones? Because I've heard, I've interviewed people on intermittent fasting, but as far as women, is it beneficial or not to intermittent fast as far as hormones go?
I've honestly seen both, to be honest. And I do find that, and you can see in the research, that men have an easier time than women do with fasting. So it's interesting to also think, well, maybe that's partial, but what's the reason why there could be, this discrepancy between men and women with fasting. So we know, yes, in terms of possibility of intermittent fasting being associated with improved insulin sensitivity, with helping maybe to lower, body fat, helping in terms of even lowering lipids, and maybe even helping with some other, factors. I even look at it sometimes in terms of cancer, having some beneficial effects. But as a woman, it is possible that intermittent fasting could disrupt estrogen balance
Mm-hmm.
and perhaps even kind of throw a wrench in these essential physiological processes. And so I definitely think that if somebody, as a woman, if you're trying to do fasting and your adrenals are depleted and you have low adrenal gland, production and low cortisol production, I would say that it would not be wise to be fasting. It's going to further deplete one.
Mm-hmm.
If everything is going beautifully and you're strong and you feel fantastic, I think it is possible to, do intermittent fasting in a healthful way as a woman. Generally speaking, it's been shown to maybe perhaps be more sensitive to fasting if you, around your cycle. So if you are in an active menstruation, it's been thought maybe don't fast then, or the couple days leading up to having your period, when oftentimes appetite and other signals are starting to increase. And so if you kind of push your body the other direction, you may find that you kind of hit a brick wall. So I don't think that fasting's for everyone. Of course, I wouldn't recommend fasting with pregnancy or nursing, as well. But I think that it could be possible, but I think that women are very sensitive to fasting, and we have to really be mindful of what that fast entails.
Mm-hmm.
Could one, fast 12 hours overnight? Yes, I think that's very doable. And many could probably even do 14 hours overnight. Do we want to be doing, 3-day complete water fast? That's where there could be some benefits, one could argue, but from a hormonal perspective, it would also, make me question, would it kind of deplete somebody or further, throw their hormones, off? On the flip side, you could argue that fasting does reduce blood glucose, where, growth hormone is going to increase it. So if you're fasting, the net effect on blood glucose, could be relatively negligible with growth hormone. So I just think that it's not like a straight answer of every woman should or every woman shouldn't. I think we need to be taking it individually. And sometimes people will find 12, 14, hours overnight, they really do feel well. And others that just say, no, I don't feel well when I do that. And I think we can use that information to, really help. Okay, maybe we're not in a state where that is a doable, scenario and not recommended, and somebody else where it could be appropriate.
I did hear that it is better for women to stay around that 14 mark period or 16 in between there, like not more. It's not beneficial really more for women than it is for men. So that's why.
And I find too, like if you have an 18-hour fast every day and you're only eating, in a 6-hour window, how do you get all the nutrients that you need to truly nourish yourself? I find it quite difficult unless you're just gorging yourself with a massive amount of food. Granted, there could be a day that happens, but in general, it seems like, a 12, 14, up to 16, I agree, typically is the max that I would normally suggest on a day-to-day type of basis. And even there, you may find that one will say, okay, I'm going to do, 13 to 14 hours most days. One day they do 16, one day maybe they don't do 12 hours, like they can kind of vary it, as well. And one of the studies I did an article on intermittent fasting a while back in my website. And I remember looking also at a breast cancer study that found that women who fasted for 13 hours or more overnight, it did help financially they were associated with lower risk, of recurrence. So there could be some benefits there, but I think a lot of it is maybe not quite quite as aggressively, too.
Mm-hmm. Since your focus is breast cancer, or like cancer in general, you work a lot with cancer. When we're considering women and ovarian cancers and breast cancers, are there foods or certain things we should be avoiding that put us at higher risk? Like, like dairy, or what do you recommend for your patients to avoid, either to prevent breast cancer or while they're going through the treatment? For any cancer, I guess, really, but.
Yeah, and that could definitely vary. But I mean, in terms of, you mentioned, the biggest thing I think are processed foods, sugars, processed meats. Those are, kind of across the board, knowing that they're not going to really add a lot of nourishing value and have the potential of having much more of a negative scenario. And processed meats definitely have been, tied again and again to increasing the risk of a variety of different types of cancers. But in terms of other types of foods, even in thinking of like the phytoestrogens of the plant estrogens, and do we have to be cautious of those? And some will say, well, can I eat a sweet potato? And I think, yes, as long as you can tolerate a sweet potato, I'm not worried about the estrogenic effects of one, from eating a sweet potato. Soy could be a little bit more of a gray area. I mean, research, honestly, with breast cancer looks, pretty either equivocal or quite honestly looks relatively protective of soy against the risk of breast cancer. But there are definitely areas we want to be careful of with soy. And I certainly would say if anyone is incorporating soy, certainly we want to make sure that we're opting for organic, non-GMO soy. You could argue that if it's fermented, it would be easier to digest and easier on the system. So things like miso or tempeh or natto, could be argued that way. And then there's some that just simply don't tolerate soy. And also with autoimmune conditions, soy and autoimmune don't always, go well together. So if somebody has Hashimoto's thyroiditis, for example, then I probably would say, no, let's don't necessarily put that in the diet. If soy is, incorporated in the diet and they're tolerating it well and they're having organic and non-GMO sources and they're having 0, 1, or up to 2 servings a day, I think that then it possibly could be incorporated safely. We don't have enough research to say that it's going to lower the risk. It's possible that it may, but it doesn't appear that it's going to increase, the risk either. But we wouldn't want to use 10 servings a day, and we don't want to use isolated soy protein powders and soy isoflavone extracts and, products that have been more adulterated that we don't have studies for, years and years to know would those definitely be safe in those populations.
Well, what about the whey protein? Is that okay? Like you mix in your smoothies, or should you stay away from that?
Typically, I mean, again, particularly if you can get organic, an unsweetened whey, I think could be used. Whey can be good to help boost up white blood cells. Mm-hmm. Some people who are sensitive to dairy can still tolerate whey. So I definitely think it can be used. And if somebody wasn't tolerating dairy, then of course there are other options one could use. And dairy in general with ovarian cancer, there was a little bit research a while back suggesting that maybe dairy could increase certain types of ovarian cancer. Mm-hmm. Breast cancer, I've seen one trial that I can recall that did show an increased risk, but most of the trials that I've read, there's pretty much not an association. So I haven't seen it protect, but I haven't seen it be, enough that we would say that it's going to increase risk. The only cancer that there appears to be a protective effect of dairy is colorectal cancer. Mm-hmm. And with dairy, I think particularly given that it's quite high on the food chain, certainly buying organic would be highly, highly recommended because of all the antibiotics and, growth hormones and things like that the dairy animals would be typically privy to, if not in an organic, situation.
Okay. What about protein? How much do we really need? Like I've read that, when you're younger, you need less protein, but as you get older, like the 65 and older, you need more protein. So is that true? Like how much do we really need? And what are good sources that you recommend for getting our protein?
We do need a little bit more protein as we age. It's not significantly more, but there is a little bit more. And I think also where our protein needs vary would be our activity levels. So if one is just going on casual walks, that'd be very different than the person who's running a marathon, 3 times a week, or somebody who's doing, intense, HIIT classes or spin classes, or, maybe no classes because it's COVID still, but, whatever kind of really intense activities, and particularly if it's very resistant and strength activated, then the protein needs would be higher. And then, of course, if somebody really was malnourished, and in a muscle wasting scenario, then of course we also would want to increase our protein needs. But generally speaking, for even the average individual, you're going to need at least 1 gram up to 1.2 grams of protein per kilogram body weight. So, and I oftentimes will even want to use more like 1.5 grams of protein per kilogram body weight. There's not much data to support one is going to need more than 2 grams of protein per kilogram body weight. And 2 grams really would be very few kind of exceptions, that we would kind of have somebody having that amount of protein. But I would say if I had to pick one ballpark number, I think 1.2 grams of protein per kilogram body weight would be that. And if you weigh, whatever your weight is in pounds, since we're not generally as accustomed to metrics here in the States, then you divide your weight by 2.2, and that will give you your weight in kilograms. And then you multiply that number by 1.2 to see how many grams of protein are you aiming for on a daily basis.
Okay. And then what sources do you recommend getting it from?
So in terms of plant sources, if tolerated, you could definitely do different kinds of beans or legumes. I also like kind of the bonus protein ones, like the flaxseed, the chia seeds, the hemp seeds, the hemp hearts, nutritional yeast. Those are kind of what I would kind of put as bonus, vegetarian, vegan, plant protein options. I wouldn't say that they're options as in they're going to give you 30 grams per meal, but if you add those different ones, you definitely can probably add in a significant amount of protein on a daily basis. And then I would definitely favor the use of wild caught fish. Of course, those that have omega-3 fatty acids, so things like wild salmon, sardines, if you like them. It's the one food I really, really wish I could eat. They're so healthy and they're small, so there's no PCB or mercury or contaminants in there. Black cod is another one that is rich in omega-3s and great protein source. Trout is another one in there that's excellent for omega-3 fatty acids, or even herring, although it's not so common here. And then I would say beyond those, then the kind of next tier would be maybe, possibly considering organic poultry, and organic pasture raised eggs. And, I don't feel like there's anything somebody could never eat, but I don't want to be encouraging a lot of, red meats and so forth. But even if somebody did want to have organic grass-fed, meat sometimes, I think it could be incorporated in in a well-balanced diet.
Okay. That's good to know. What about supplement, like cod liver oil supplements? Do you recommend fish oil supplements? Could that be beneficial?
I mean, generally speaking, I think that, fish oil is one that we tend to be low in omega-3s across the board. So that's one that most everyone can do well with supplementing with omega-3 fatty acids. Cod liver oil in particular tends to be higher in vitamin A. So sometimes I'm careful though, because if we give too much vitamin A, it can actually be detrimental for bones. But there are some that would benefit, from that. I normally use, just a fish oil concentrate. And again, using molecular distillation if we're looking at supplements, third-party testing to make sure we're getting really clean, products. But I think that, I do take a fish oil myself daily, and I think that it's, other than if you're having, certain scenarios, but generally speaking, they're going to be a good thing to incorporate for most people.
I think it's good for your skin and your brain. I just wondered if I don't supplement, but I've been considering it. So I wanted to ask you.
Yeah, it's good for inflammation. It's possibly even good in terms of, helping with blood sugar regulation and improving insulin sensitivity, possibly some anti-cancer effects, some cardiovascular benefits, lowering triglycerides, immune system. There are a lot of potential perks with using it that, you can measure and see, omega-3 index. But I generally find that unless one is supplementing, with the exception of a couple patients who have sardines multiple times a week, then most people I find are indeed low.
Okay, good to know. Well, what role does our microbiome play as far as hormone regulation?
So our gut is, kind of the foundation of everything, right? We know that, 60, 70% depending on the research that we read, is, really of our immune system is housed within our gut. So if our digestion's awry, you can pretty much imagine that other factors are going to be, awry as well, because the gut bacteria just work in close contact with our immune system. And the bacteria are going to be key because they help to metabolize fiber, into having more, anti-inflammatory, protective, short chain fatty acids that are the key fuel for the cells in the colon. And so we know that the composition of our gut bacteria and our ecosystem, basically kind of our microbiome there, that is really, crucial. And we are seeing, studies to show that, there are certain bacteria that seem to be very protective in, lowering our issues, even in terms of hormonally related conditions. And then we're also seeing, of course, gut bacteria linked with blood sugar dysregulation and mood issues and, cardiovascular, components and a variety of other health conditions, too. And you probably even heard of the estrabolome in terms of basically our collective bacteria that can convert estrogen to its active form. And this is an area we need a lot more research, but just kind of making the tie with estrogen and hormones. And estrogen, again, it's going to be probably a lot of different hormones, not just estrogen, but hormones with digestion and gut, and how that could definitely impact our risk of developing particularly postmenopausal estrogen receptor positive breast cancer. And they are seeing different bacteria, levels there. And when we think about, another thing I always think about is, how once we have hormones, can we clear them through our gut and through our liver? And, there's like an enzyme called beta-glucuronidase. You probably are familiar with that one. And that's key to keep being able to, convert estrogen into active forms and kind of being able to kind of clear that. And if that builds up in our system, and you can even measure this within stool, then definitely we know dysbiosis could occur, and levels of estrogen could then become too high or too low, depending on, what's going on. So if our gut is healthy, then, that can definitely make sure that, other pieces, fall into line. And when I think about perimenopause, oftentimes, bloating is up there very regularly. And so I do think it makes sense to, see, okay, what's going on with the gut bacteria? And something sometimes just as simple as, what's your stomach acid like? If we have enough stomach acid, then that can oftentimes break our food down sufficiently so that we aren't as bloated as one, was prior. So sometimes we can just do some things to make sure we have adequate stomach acid, address that, and then that can, really improve bloating. So definitely, all these, areas really start to overlap, more and more. And it's amazing, and it's really intriguing, and it also can be quite confusing because they do all overlap in so many different areas.
No doubt. What's the best way to help the microbiome? Like, do we need, I think I was reading like vitamin B, D, and how do you feel about nutritional yeast? I heard that was good to help with the B if you don't supplement.
So, definitely for the gut, we want to make sure B vitamins are there. We want to make sure magnesium's there. We want to make sure vitamin D's there. I think fish oil with the omega-3 fatty acids is very key. You could argue probiotics could be very beneficial. There we could also say we're going to use food for prebiotics to grow the probiotics. But all of those definitely are going to be key. And interestingly, was thinking of our discussion on fasting. Fasting can actually, act as a catalyst for protective microorganisms in the gut. So, again, sometimes it's like, well, wait, is fasting, one step forward, one step back, or one step forward, two steps back? So again, another factor that could say, do I want to consider fasting, or do I fall in another category that I just simply don't do well with fasting? But it could possibly be, to one's advantage from a microbiome perspective to be able to incorporate that.
Mm. And what about fiber? Fiber is important to help us get rid of those extra hormones like estrogen, right?
Yeah, we want fiber to bind to everything from toxins to hormones to cholesterol, all those different things. And if we can bind to them and then we excrete them within stool, then we're going to definitely be in a healthier, space. And so, I do find that if, a high fiber diet, I think, is very important. Hence, the push for so many plant foods in the diet is to really provide that protective dietary fiber. And even thinking in terms of weight loss, if we are losing weight and mobilizing fatty acids, then we want to make sure we have fiber to bind to toxins. Because if we lose weight, we're going to definitely mobilize, toxins are typically lipophilic. They sit and live in our fat cells. So if we start breaking down and getting rid of those, we want to have fiber to bind to those to not put us at risk. So I definitely think that it's important to have a high fiber diet. Doesn't necessarily mean that has to be all in a high carbohydrate diet with a whole bunch of carbohydrates and grains and so forth. But a lot of vegetables. I think some of those key nuts and seeds that we were talking about. And certainly we can even look at other additional fiber sources if needed. But I definitely think it's a crucial piece for sure.
I don't think most Americans do not get enough fiber in their diet.
I think the average we're probably less than half of where we should be. So we're quite far from having a good 30, 35, maybe even more grams of fiber, daily. And if you are at 12, 15 grams of fiber, as much as I know, I love the, energy and the incentive. Like I want you to double it tomorrow, because then you'll probably say, oh my gosh, Natalie, I'm so bloated and uncomfortable. So if you are a lower fiber diet and that, then just make a goal of gradually increasing a few grams at a time. You may go from hypothetically, 14 grams of fiber to 17 grams of fiber, and do that for a few days to 5 days or a week, and then go to 20 and then go a little higher. So if you go too quickly, you probably will find that you'll be bloated and gassy and uncomfortable. It's not going to hurt you, but you just may be physically, a little bit uncomfortable.
Mm-hmm. Is oatmeal good? So like I read different things. Oatmeal's good. Oatmeal's bad. It's like, what do we eat?
So, oatmeal is definitely going to be great in terms of a soluble fiber. So it is really good, particularly in terms of, cholesterol. Okay. And it definitely can help to, bind, hormones and so forth. We can also use the insoluble fibers and things like flaxseed. And we can even use prebiotic fibers, even partially hydrolyzed guar gum and things like that too, that can be useful. But typically, if we get a lot of vegetables and some fruit in the diet, we're going to have a blend of different types of fibers. And then we don't have to really pay as much attention to, does it fit each specific thing? Just do we eat enough of these healthy foods? And then probably you're going to cover your basis, that way.
As far as flaxseed, we keep talking about it. Other than putting that in a smoothie, how do you eat that?
You could put it like in a soup. If you happen to have, yogurt, something like that, you could put it in that. If you did, make an overnight chia pudding or oat thing, you could do it there. Again, you could do flax water. And I know people who do it. It just is so like blah. It doesn't seem very, enticing. If you are, making oatmeal, you could put it in that. If you happen to have, quinoa or rice, something like that, you could put it there. If you're not doing grains, but you're making like riced cauliflower, you could easily add ground flaxseed and just kind of mix it in there. If you had a stew, you could kind of mix it in and hide it, pretty readily that way too.
Okay, just good to know, because other than putting in the smoothie, like I'd like to increase my intake of it, but I don't really know what to do with it. So that's good information.
And you may not want to have a smoothie every single day.
Yeah, I'm like, oh. What role does the liver play in regards to our hormones? Like what supplements, what's important to know about the liver?
Liver's crucial because we think of liver, of course, being key for detoxification. And it is. It filters our blood and from our digestive tract and, metabolizes our fats, our proteins, our carbohydrates. And I think I read it has over 200 functions in the body. Mm-hmm. So we know it's highly important, but it directly links in with hormone metabolism because we have to be able to clear the hormones from our liver. And if we have a sluggish liver, and this is something that we'll also, definitely we'll always want to look at with anyone, but particularly with women, we're looking at women's hormones because we need to be able to clear those hormones from the liver. Otherwise, that sluggish liver is going to really start to impair the system and start to see, that weight gain and the fatigue and, more of these different kinds of key roles and symptoms that we tend to, be experienced. So it helps to ensure that our hormones are metabolized appropriately, regulating our sex hormone levels, eliminating excess amounts of hormones if they happen to, build up.
So what should we be doing? What should we be eating? What should we be supplementing? What should we be doing to make our liver work?
So generally speaking, like all the whole foods that we've been talking about, those are very key to support the liver and the gut for that matter. And so those will help to, have the hormones just naturally be in a healthier, way. So in addition to what we've already mentioned, I would say cruciferous vegetables are absolutely crucial. These are crucial for hormones, but these are also definitely crucial for liver. And if there's a thyroid related issue, we want to be cautious in terms of not having too much, perhaps in the way of raw cruciferous, or just be mindful of that. I would also say that we haven't talked much in terms of herbs and spices, but they can be fantastic for just natural, liver detoxification, everything from cinnamon for good blood sugar, and garlic's going to be great for inactivating carcinogens and lowering lipids. We can see rosemary having benefits, and ginger and turmeric having significant anti-inflammatory roles. Lots of herbs and spices, I think, can be fantastic, there. Of course, avoiding smoking, minimizing alcohol consumption. And then also too, I think even of, xenoestrogens and kind of where are we getting, things from outside, from an environmental perspective that could be, playing a role. And supplement wise, I wouldn't say that we're going to use all these supplements by any means, but I think about, those B vitamins, again, very key. Selenium is going to be key for glutathione. So that's something I'm going to want to possibly look at. Curcumin, the active component in turmeric, having such significant anti-inflammatory activity and also high antioxidant potential. Would that be something that we want to keep in mind? Or what about green tea, rich in the antioxidants and polyphenols, having liver protective effects, and also could be, beneficial. Although I will say that depending on genomics, too much green tea may actually slow methylation a little bit. So we want to be, don't want to go crazy one direction, or the other. And there are just so many that we could kind of think of in different ways that could be something we would want to consider.
In your email that you sent out about the women's hormones, which was excellent, you mentioned methylated B complex. So what's the difference between that one and if I just went to the store and picked up a B complex vitamin? Why should I get that one?
So you want to typically opt for methylated versions because there's another step basically in the process of methylation. And many of us have methylation challenges within our genome. And for those of you that really know your genome, if you have an NTHFR or COMT variant, we know that there's a hiccup essentially in that genomic process. And so if we were to go for a standard synthetic B complex, it's simply not going to kind of be able to convert to being able to really activate and be beneficial for you. So purchasing methylated outright automatically skips the step of, no, we don't have to even question. We just know this is going to be a more bioavailable version that will be much better utilized by the system. And how do you know if it's methylated? It's not going to read necessarily methylated B complex on the front of the bottle, but when you look at the ingredient list and the sources of those nutrients, just a few of them, for example, for vitamin B12, if it's synthetic, it will read cyanocobalamin. If it's methylated, it will read methylcobalamin.
Okay.
If it's folic acid, it will read synthetic folic acid. If it's methylated, it may read methylated folate, or it may read like a MTHF. If you see any of those kind of letters, then that typically, or you may see like some letters like MTHF, like activated folate or something like that.
Okay.
And then you can also see under B6. So if you look at B6, B12, and folate in particular, B6, the active form is something called pyridoxal 5-phosphate. That would be the inactive version, or the synthetic version would be pyridoxine. So you can kind of see these differences. And there are, at some stores and health food stores, you can get methylated Bs, there. You can definitely order things, of course, online too. And I'm not meaning that everyone needs to have methylated B vitamins, but it is one that many people are needing Bs and magnesium, because stress depletes our B vitamins, it depletes magnesium, and we tend to have a fair amount of stress these days.
No doubt. With magnesium, there's so many different ones. I wanted to get your opinion on that. I think I take the magnesium glycinate at bedtime. What do you recommend?
So it depends on the goal. I really like magnesium glycinate. It's very bioavailable. I do find that people like that one, for sleep. Some people have found that it does make them tired. I've taken magnesium glycinate in the day. It doesn't seem to bother me individually, but I like magnesium glycinate overall. If we are working with somebody who's more constipated, then I may want to consider magnesium citrate, because that can help to kind of have more of a laxative-like effect. And just in mind, thinking of constipation, that could be a sign that there's too much estrogen in the system, because you're reabsorbing estrogen if you have a slower motility. So having regular bowel movements are definitely crucial. And then for anxiety, I actually really like magnesium threonate. Can be quite good for anxiety in particular. And there are other, types of magnesium. Like I also really like magnesium malate. I'm not a big fan of magnesium oxide, because it's not very bioavailable, and it does tend to have more of a laxative-like effect. So I feel like we don't really gain a lot of ground there. So typically magnesium glycinate is one that most people can always use. And then if we were looking for something in particular, then we could possibly, switch up to different ones too.
This might be a silly question, but could you take like a magnesium citrate in the morning and the glycinate at night, or should you only stick with one type?
You could definitely switch up types. And sometimes people need to do that because they need higher levels of magnesium. But if they have too much in the way of citrate, they get too loose of stools. But if they don't have any citrate, they're a little more constipated. So sometimes it is kind of having two different or three different, but normally it makes things easy, two different ones, and then being able to adjust as you need, almost based on bowel tolerance, too.
Okay, awesome. I just wondered about that. And what about milk thistle? I've heard a lot of great things about it. I just wanted to kind of get a brief summary of what it is and what it would do for us.
So milk thistle is most notably known for liver support, right? It's an active component is known as silymarin, and it's been suggested to regenerate liver tissues, to help reduce inflammation, just to protect our liver cells from, damage overall. So I see this used a lot in terms of elimination of, buildup of heavy metals, of prescription medications or environmental pollutants or, alcohol in the liver, people may opt to use milk thistle to help, support liver function, overall. So I think of it more directly liver bonus. That's going to have still, again, another positive effect on hormone metabolism. But I would say its number one, role there would be liver support.
Okay. Is there any certain type, or can we just go to the store and get milk thistle? And what about any major side effects? Is it pretty safe to take if I want to go start taking that?
I mean, it's generally pretty safe to take. It's, typically it's very well tolerated, and not too many challenges, with milk thistle. Milk thistle teas, and typically teas can be fantastic, but because milk thistle is one that the teas are not effective because of the water soluble, factor there. So I wouldn't suggest using a tea in that case, but you could do, what you see if you look at like silymarin is you'll see like percent, content. So kind of the higher, contents that you see in terms of, percent silymarin or silibinin, that's another one that we oftentimes will see as another component, there, like the silymarin in there, to kind of see. So oftentimes you'll see if they're standardized to 80% silymarin, that's generally going to be a pretty good sign. And if it's at 50%, it's probably not high quality. So 80% is kind of just a general guideline, and that would just be, you'd see that it may not be on the front part, but on the ingredient part, it will probably say next to milk thistle, standardized to contain X% silymarin.
Okay. So the higher, the better. Good to know.
From this perspective, yes.
Okay. So about turmeric again, is it the curcumin and the turmeric the same thing? Because I feel like that's confusing. And should we be getting it from the spice itself, or is it okay to do, like I do a liquid turmeric, but I know there's capsules. I mean, really, how should we be supplementing with turmeric if we want to?
So curcumin is just the active component in turmeric. Okay. Turmeric is the spice that you can purchase and use in your foods. And I think it's great to use in foods or beverages, or, any way we can kind of increase herb and spice, in our diets is fantastic. They're excellent in terms of antioxidants across the board. Curcumin, the difficult part with turmeric is it's not highly bioavailable. So that's where it tends to be a little bit of a trickier piece. So if we're looking at turmeric, and I'm sure you've heard of, maybe it should be combined with different kinds of spice like black pepper and the piperine to kind of enhance the bioavailability of that. And I would say in terms of foods, typically if you think about, when turmeric is used in culinary purposes, it's not normally like just turmeric, right? It's turmeric plus ginger, plus garlic, plus cardamom, plus coriander, plus this. Like it's a blend of different kinds of spices. And I think that likely has an effect on being able to increase the bioavailability of turmeric and of all those different spices for that matter. But also turmeric's more bitter. And so I think it also is balancing the flavor, of these different things, as well. So I'm certainly a proponent of, getting, turmeric, in the system. If we're going to be going for capsules, then I would definitely say that, just buying a turmeric supplement is like just putting turmeric in a little capsule and then they charge you a lot more for it. I don't think you're probably going to get great bioavailability from that. I think there are still to be, so I kind of argued of kind of what form would be best. But there's one known as Meriva that has been shown to have greater absorption than your standard curcumin. And there are several brands that sell a Meriva type of curcumin to have that anti-inflammatory response. And if you weren't going for Meriva type, another one that I would definitely consider would be liposomal. And liposomal curcumin, and anything that's liposomal, is generally going to have greater bioavailability and getting really into the cells. You typically can use a little bit of a lesser amount, And the only downside I see of using liposomal products really kind of with anything is that you will pay more for them. They are great, but you will see that the cost reflects that. And one could argue that you don't have to take as much, but it just, again, if you're looking to kind of see, or if you found that you didn't have any benefit from one, you could always consider, okay, well, was I taking a really highly bioavailable type like liposomal or Mariva or C3 complex? There's some other ones out there, but if it just says turmeric as a capsule, I wouldn't waste my money on that.
Okay, so Mariva, is that how do you spell that so I can look that up later?
Meriva.
Okay, I'm going to look that up. So that's a good one to do for turmeric. Awesome.
Yeah.
All right. MER, you said? IVA. Okay.
Meriva.
Okay, great. Because that I know is important, because I've had patients tell me breast cancer, whatever, menopausal, for breast cancer prevention, and like hot flashes, people have said that turmeric is very beneficial. So that's definitely one I think is important. So let's just talk a little bit about sleep, because I think it's way undervalued, but it's huge when it comes to hormone regulation, right? What do you think is important to know about sleep and hormone regulation?
You really, really, really want to sleep. It's so crucial. The pituitary gland, which is your master controller of kind of all of your hormones, is very sensitive to a lack of sleep. And so, while we're sleeping, we are able to kind of help control the release of growth hormones, of our thyroid hormones, for example, and it also suppresses the release of cortisol. So if we are chronically sleep deprived, we are very likely going to see a rise in cortisol, and particularly in the evenings. And that's when the cortisol should be at a lower level. And that definitely will disturb your sleep further. So we have to make sure we bring the cortisol down in the evening to allow for it to then be, kind of rejuvenate overnight to then get going, the next, in the morning. So it definitely is key, I think, in terms of hormones. And of course, if cortisol's off, that's going to set a cascade of issues in terms of insulin resistance and weight gain and, and other factors, there too. And then additionally with sleep, and speaking of other kinds of hormones, you mentioned this very much very early in the beginning, is they're also important in terms of the hormones that control our appetite. So if we don't get enough sleep, we tend to not have enough leptin, and leptin's a hormone that regulates how full are we, how satiated are we. And so if those drop because we don't get enough sleep, then we're hungry all the time, and then we're eating more. And at the same time, the hormone ghrelin, which stimulates our appetite, starts increasing, and that makes us even hungrier. And then what do we want? Do we want, broccoli and hummus and kale salad? No, we want carbohydrates to satisfy our appetite. And then it gets us, back into like, oh no, now again, higher insulin resistance. And so and I don't really necessarily think that this is a lack of willpower that's wanting you to eat cookies, late at night. It's the lack of sleep. So I really do think that it's crucial that we are, really put sleep as a priority, because it's going to make such a difference, not only in terms of our hormones, but we definitely now know too, blood pressure and heart attacks and diabetes and, cancer and sleep apnea and all of those things, certainly have, significant, associations with a lack of sleep.
Basically, it keeps us younger too. So if you're thinking about anti-aging, you got to get more sleep. It's huge.
It's like your brain's detox way. It's how your brain detoxes.
Yeah. And
it regenerates that way overnight.
And people trying to lose weight, I feel like it's such a vicious circle if you're not sleeping. I mean, your cortisol will elevate your blood sugars. And then, like you said, you're going to be hungrier, less full. You're going to gain weight. You're going to gain dangerous belly fat, which puts you at risk for everything else. It's just this huge thing. So do you recommend supplementing with melatonin or sleep aids, or because some people just can't sleep? I mean, it's just hard to get sleep. They can't turn their brain off. I don't know, but what do you recommend to get
So
more
I
sleep?
try to figure out, why they're not sleeping, and trying to determine, are they low in magnesium? Because if that's the case, then definitely we can try magnesium. Is it that it's just more of a busybody? And then it's like, okay, let's turn off electronics. Let's make sure you're sleeping in a really dark room. Maybe an Epsom salt bath, maybe, some meditative music or guided imagery, those types of things. If we see that cortisol is high, then it's a matter of, okay, what do we want to use to lower cortisol in the evening? And depending on, the individual, I may use a combination of theanine or phosphatidylserine, or, again, putting a little magnesium in there, or magnolia. May look at something like passion flower tea to lower cortisol. Melatonin is also good to help, help us get to sleep. I don't find melatonin typically helps people kind of stay asleep, but we definitely, if we don't sleep, we're not going to have high enough melatonin. And so it can we want to have that melatonin to, again, protect us. And even there too, there's inverse relationships with various health conditions such as breast cancer. So we do want to make sure we have enough melatonin. It may or may not be necessary for you to supplement with it, but it's something we could consider, as an option.
Okay, good to know. I just wondered because it's so important, and it's something I've definitely been focusing more on as I've gotten older. I kind of abused that way back then, but now I realize it's huge for our health. It's so important. So it's definitely should be made a priority. Let's just talk real quick about bone health because that's a huge issue for hormones. And as we get older, what are your thoughts on bones? What should we be doing? Should we be supplementing with D3? I think you mentioned D3. Maybe I talked about D3 and K2. What do we need to know about all that?
So essentially, we know that, as our circulating estrogen declines as we get older, then something known as osteoclastic activity increases. Osteoclasts are kind of breaking down bone. Mm-hmm. Osteoblasts are building up bone. So that's happening more in developmental years. And then as we start to get older, the osteoclasts, start to, rise, and that is more results in bone resorption and decreased bone strength. And bone turnover does, slow, and we start to have bone loss even up to 1% to 2%, a year, due to this increased bone resorption. So in terms of nutrients that I think about in terms of bone density, I mean, one, I want to see where are the bone strength, where is bone density? First of all, yes, you want to make sure people are being active and incorporating strength training. I think that is really, really crucial. And we want to keep in mind what type of exercise is really going to be best for hormones, adrenal hormones, sex hormones, bones, all of these different factors, but definitely for bones, strength training is going to be very crucial. And then nutrient-wise, ideally, I measure where everyone's nutrients are, and then we pick which ones are the lowest ones, and then we supplement those particular ones. But, typically you can't really go wrong with using D3. K2 is like a sidekick to D3. So I do like to use D3 K2 combinations because K2 is going to help enhance the availability and the absorption of D3. So I like to kind of use those in conjunction with another. Magnesium we've talked about, definitely also very key for bone health. And even having that anti-inflammatory diet, and the fish oil could also be, beneficial in there too. Zinc is one we haven't mentioned, but zinc also is important for bone health, also for blood sugar regulation. Doesn't necessarily mean you need to have a zinc supplement, but if one were low in zinc, that is one that I would also keep in mind in terms of bone health. Of course, calcium. I don't necessarily use dietary supplements of calcium for most patients. If we see that clinically there are deficiencies in calcium, then I will consider using some supplemental calcium. But generally speaking, and definitely looking at the research in the more recent years, we're seeing more negative effects, I think, particularly of high doses of calcium supplementation. So I think if I'm using calcium supplements, I'm using more like 300, 600 milligrams a day, not 1,200, 1,500 milligrams. I want to get some of that calcium from the diet, not necessarily meaning from dairy, but just from the diet. in general, and then we can add in a little extra if needed, there supplementally. But across the board, I think calcium's been overrated. It is very important. It is very key for bone health, but it is not the number one, the only nutrient that we need for bone health. I think equally important, put in there the D3, the K2, the magnesium, the zinc. You mentioned the vitamin A, that's kind of like a fine balance there. You could, argue in what about copper, what about boron, what about strontium, those we have a little bit less, research with, but I think typically the D3, K2, magnesium, zinc, possibly calcium are ones that I certainly am kind of on alert of looking for bone health.
So if you don't eat dairy, what are some great sources of calcium? Because I think this is important.
Definitely in certain dark leafy greens, not spinach, because spinach has oxalates, so we're not going to absorb much there. But if you like collard greens, they are very potent. Next up probably would be bok choy, which is also pretty decent in terms of calcium. Probably a little significantly, not even more than, it's less than half, probably like a third or so. Kale can also give you good amounts. And then half of that, broccoli even gives you, some calcium in there too. So the greens can be a good source. Beans and legumes can be a good source. You can even get some in sesame, seeds or tahini, and added sugar. But if one is using blackstrap molasses, it also is quite rich in iron and calcium for looking at, those types of nutrients there. And then you'll get a little bit, I'd rather do those than fortified, products that are giving you, that added, calcium too.
And zinc's hard to get in your diet, isn't it? Unless you're eating shellfish. So do you think most people should supplement with zinc?
It's in protein foods, plant and animal. It's highest by far, leaps and bounds higher in oysters than anything else. But, all different kinds of protein foods will provide zinc, even nuts and seeds and things like that. But I will say that, if one's following a vegan diet, zinc is the most limiting nutrient. So that's, sometimes people think about, am I going to be low in protein or iron? Zinc is most highly, the greatest risk of being low if one's following a vegan diet. Where I've seen zinc, naturally in oncology, I see zinc tend to be a little bit lower because we use zinc to generate white blood cells, and white blood cells, depending on treatment, may have been lowered. So our need for zinc is a little bit greater. But I also have found a lot of genomic variants with the zinc, with the SNP that's related to zinc. And so I do think that may be something, I don't know the percentage necessarily, but from the patients that I've looked at, I see that more regularly than I don't. But some people, I find that their zinc levels look perfectly sufficient, and then others really struggle with their zinc.
Okay. One last thing about like anxiety and depression with hormonal shifts and all that. Are there certain supplements? I think you mentioned something earlier, but are there certain supplements people can take to help with those issues?
We mentioned the magnesium 3 and 8 in terms of anxiety. And I think my first thought would be, if we think like all of a sudden, sometimes people say, I've never been anxious, and all of a sudden I started becoming anxious. That to me is like hormone shift. Okay, let's figure out what hormone shift, let's balance it. And then we're not looking at adding more pills and potions to help, you mitigate and band-aid up anxiety, but more really resolve, why are you anxious in the first place? What was the culprit that kind of led to that? But in general, for anxiety, I do think magnesium can be, useful. It's possible that we could look at the potential use of GABA or tryptophan, depending on, the type of anxiety, depression that we may be seeing. And SAMe is something that we may want to consider. Not necessarily, definitely not for everyone, because some people won't do well with SAMe. But that's typically more kind of, I feel like, a depressed mood and a lower, kind of a flat affect, more so than anxiety. But I definitely, if I think of anxiety, it makes me think of maybe a variant of the hormones building up. And so if we can clear the hormones through, that may also calm the anxiety right there.
Okay, good to know. How can working with a nutritionist like you help with hormonal balances and imbalances? I think it seemed like it'd be very beneficial to work with you more on an in-depth basis, because you can analyze all of these things we're talking about. We're not just randomly doing things ourselves.
Yeah, I mean, I think sometimes we can be very astute and, okay, I know sex hormones are linked here. I know my gut is linked to this. I know my liver's linked to this. I know blood sugar's linked to this. And it's just hard to kind of tease things apart and, kind of really see the interrelationship and how these are all interacting with one another and how that's playing out in you as one individual. So, my hope, in really looking at women's hormones is that we can talk about different areas like nutrition, liver, gut, sugar, exercise, bone health, and so forth, and then identify where are the biggest risk factors. Where does one really identify okay, these three, this is where I really need to focus. These are my struggle points. And then we can hopefully focus and target those, because otherwise you may feel like you're just spinning circles with a list of 50 different things you're trying to do every day. And kudos to you if you can do all 50 of those things every day, but that's going to be quite overwhelming and too much for most people to do every day. So if we can tackle it and streamline and be like, okay, here are my goals for this week, these 2 to 3 things. And then we can kind of slowly build and then also see, okay, this is definitely helping. No, I don't feel like this, you kind of adjust as you go along. And then certainly if needed, do we need to test? Do we need to assess any of these kinds of markers? And sometimes we can get away with not having to test. And other times it's just so helpful to know specifically, where these biomarkers may be for an individual at that particular time.
But you can organize all that, right? You can get those tests going in the right direction, analyze them, and determine what their needs are, like more of like personalized medicine, right?
Yep, that's what I love doing that. It's like my detective work. I love it.
Yeah, because that's huge. Honestly, when hormones are out of balance, our whole quality of life is off. I mean, you just don't feel well. It's such a big part of our life. And probably for men as well. We don't talk about men as much, but you just don't feel well. So this is a huge area. And I'm so excited to talk about, I just want you to talk about real quick what you're starting as far as the women's health program, because I think it's going to be a great thing for a lot of people.
I certainly hope so. I'm going to be starting in mid-April, a 6-week group program on women's health and hormones. And my idea of this is to definitely go into depth about all the different topics that we discussed today, and also have interaction back and forth so that there's support for all of the women there in that group. And then also we'll have like a private chat that women can kind of interact with that way, and also incorporating individual consultation, because I think we are going to still have to kind of tweak some things to make sure that we really are targeting specifically what we need to focus on for that individual. But I'm really excited to kind of get it going and see where we can gain in 6 weeks of kind of really gathering this information. And I'm going to also incorporate food journals and nutrient analyses or menu plans if those are desired or not. If they don't want them, they don't need to do those, and we'll have recordings of the sessions and hopefully just overall collaboration and connection with myself and also with the other amazing women in the group. I'm really excited, looking forward to it.
Yeah, it sounds awesome. I'm going to put the link in there. And also, if people sign up, you offer a discount for signing up early, right? Or do we miss that?
Yes. There's a discount through early birds through April 8th, if I remember correctly. Don't quote me on that date exactly, but I think it's April 8th at $5.97, and then it's going to jump up to $8.97. I think it's worth $8.97, but I know also finances are tight for many, particularly in terms of COVID time. So it'll be $5.97, and then there's also a fast action bonus. There's still a few spots left for the first 10 that we get signed up, that they'll have an additional complimentary 30-minute strategy session that we can kind of really help to focus and plan what do we need to be looking at and how do we help do this for an individual. So that goes to the first 10 that are signed up. So should be fun.
All right. Awesome. Well, I'm going to put the link in. I think everybody needs to get on your email list anyway. Your emails are awesome. They're so informative. I just learned so much just about all this important stuff. So I'm definitely going to send people your way. Thank you so much for joining me again. It's been awesome.
Well, thank you so much for having me and for all the kind words and the support. And my goal is really to help others out there. So I'm really happy to hear that the newsletters and emails have been helpful in that way. And, I really just think that we all deserve to have energy. We all deserve to, feel well and to be healthy. And I'm happy to be here to help support that plan. So thank you so much, Kimberly. Have a great rest of your day.
Thank you. You as well.
Thank you.